The pick is in.
The Atlanta Hawks have made a selection in the 2024 NBA draft. I'm Tanisha Batiste, and we are joined by Brad Rowland. The Hawks have made their selection in the 2024 NBA draft. And Brad from Locked On Hawks is here to break down the Hawks selecting Zaccharie Risacher with the number 1 pick, presented by LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnba. So Brad, not a big shocker there as far as going with Risacher, but what was your reaction in terms of the Hawks going in that direction versus maybe going with Alex Sarr?
Like you said, not a big shock, especially after the last couple of days seemed to center on Risacher. And look, the entire time, this has been a wide open situation where in most drafts, it's kind of clear who's going to go number 1. And this is not one of those drafts, as we talked about many times in the last couple of months. But in the end, it seems like the Hawks went with the, I'm not going to say a safe option, but kind of what the league is doing right now, which is these wings who can shoot and defend. Maybe not a ton of star power, but a guy that they can kind of be trusting and relying upon, and kind of modeling after what the rest of the league is doing, and honestly trying to match teams like the Celtics, who are led by those big-time wings.
Indeed. Now, how does going with that wing, that guy that gives them 3 and D, give you some insight into maybe what the Hawks might do as far as building around or even moving on from Trae Young?
Yeah, that's the big question now. Like, once this pick is made, and it's been made, and that was the big drama, they have other work to do. They have decisions to make in the backcourt in particular. I do think the Risacher is not going to be necessarily like a number 1 option, so he does fit well with their guys they already have, including Trae Young. But it's not a secret. The Hawks have this kind of decision to make in the backcourt that most people don't believe that those guys, Trae Young and DeJounte Murray, are going to be and should be linked together for the long term. So that choice is going to be big. I do think that he fits well with Trae Young in particular as a guy who could set him up. But certainly that the attention now shifts. Once this pick is over, it was always going to be domino number 2 was the backcourt.
Indeed. Domino number 2 has been the backcourt. But, Brad, you could make an argument for maybe the front court and some challenges that they're having, especially at the 5 position, if you will. So when you look at now this domino has fallen, and now it's really time to get into what the Hawks are going to do with free agency. How does going with a Risacher for the number 1 draft pick kind of impact what they're going to do, in your opinion, in free agency?
I think it gives them flexibility, because the hardest thing to find is these 2-way wings. And look, no one's talked about it yet as to why they did this, but I'm pretty confident Landry Fields is going to say something to that effect, where everyone wants these 2-way wings. And basically, because you have to spend such a high price. Look, Mikal Bridges got traded for 5 first-round picks just a day ago. And while he may not be Mikal Bridges, that's kind of tell you what those guys go for in free agency and go for in trade. So they're definitely going to be important to see what happens next. And I think the center spot's one to keep an eye on for sure. Capella and Kongwu has been that pairing for a long while, and they might break up them too. But in the end, they didn't pick a center, and that leaves more flexibility in that position right now, because they could still keep them both if they have to.
Yeah, and one more question before we wrap up. Just going back to Landry Fields had already kind of tipped his hand real quick to last week, saying, hey, we're going to pretty much stick with that number 1 pick. Were you good with them sticking with the number 1 pick in terms of the future?
Yeah, I think if they had traded back, it wouldn't have been a big surprise to me. I would have been okay with it. But in the end, the most likely thing in any single pick is to stay there and make the pick, especially number 1 overall. There are not a ton of teams that have traded that pick away. So it's anything but a surprise. I'm not surprised by it. And they got their guy. In the end, that's the one thing that you can do at number 1 overall, is pick whoever you want. And in the end, they chose that to be Risacher. So they're obviously comfortable with it. And that's where we're going long term.
Indeed. For more on the Hawks, subscribe to Locked On Hawks on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And for more on Zaccharie Risacher, let's get an inside look on his path to the NBA.
This is Richard Saman from the Locked On NBA Big Board podcast, talking about Zaccharie Risacher, the wing from France. He is a very interesting prospect at 6'8", only a 6'9.5" wingspan. No, it's actually pretty big, but for a wing, you want to have somebody with a lot longer than their body of a wingspan, generally 7 foot plus, approaching that. Not quite there. It's kind of a red flag for him, but his dad played basketball in Spain, so he comes from a basketball family. He's a really good shooter, and he's a very good defender. Everything else kind of in between is a little bit tough to come across. Reminds you a little bit of how he's at the top of the draft, the way Jabari Smith was at the top of the draft just 2 years ago, compared to some creators and some bigs. the same way that Jabari Smith was at the top. He's not a bad comp. A little bit of different players, but that 3-and-D mold with some area to fill in is going to intrigue some teams at the top. And because of that, Risacher is actually one of the safer players. And if you're looking for a player that can be 3-and-D right away, start, but not really grow too much into star mold, Zaccharie Risacher is your guy.
For continuing coverage of the 2024 NBA Draft, subscribe to Locked On NBA on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.